Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. Today I'm talking about Kabbalah. What is Kabbalah? In simple terms, it is a system of Jewish mysticism which describes the blueprint of creation according to Kabbalists and shows a pathway back to divinity from our existence here on earth. And it's all about patterns. Finding patterns in things, finding how everything fits into a greater organized framework, and seeing the face of God by seeing that pattern. So that's broadly speaking Kabbalah. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Kabbalah emerged as a spiritual tradition, and I'm going to talk about some of the key concepts within Kabbalah. So it may be that I do a few videos covering this topic, but the purpose of today's video at least is going to be to talk a little bit about the history of Kabbalah and where it came from. So we're all familiar with some of the more mainstream or perhaps just more well-known denominations of Judaism. In modern times you've got conservative, orthodox, ultra-orthodox, Reform Jews, etc. But not many people know about Kabbalism, which is more of a fringe belief within the broader umbrella of Judaism or rabbinical religion or Israelite religion. Much the same way as Christian mysticism is on the fringes or the margins of mainstream exoteric Christianity. But this school of Kabbalah, this tradition of Kabbalah, is not something that is just a modern innovation. It goes back to biblical times. In fact, it goes back to the Old Testament, the origins of the schools of the Kabbalah. And so in order to understand where Kabbalah came from, we first need to understand the story of the prophet Ezekiel. So Ezekiel is an Old Testament prophet. He lived towards the end of the 500s before the Common Era. He lived to see the destruction of Jerusalem by the armies of Babylon and the exile of the people living in the kingdom of Judah into Babylon, where before they were an independent nation. And he witnessed the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, which he had spent his life prophesying about and saying that a day will come when this temple is destroyed. And Ezekiel also had a series of visions of a new temple, a heavenly temple, as well as the throne of God. And it is those visions and the content of those visions which become important to later Jewish mystics. And really, Ezekiel's visions and the story of his life represent a shift away from seeing the presence of God or the Shekinah as dwelling in a particular spot on earth, in a particular temple built to a particular design, and much more seeing the presence of God as something which is transcendent and can be anywhere at once and accessed so long as we know the steps that are required in order to do so. And so what Ezekiel's visions really did was open the way for a direct experience of divinity without the mediation of a priesthood within the context of Judaism. And so what were the visions that Ezekiel had that sort of paved the way for this new way of experiencing God in Judaism, this more mystical way of experiencing God? Well, one vision that he had was of, as I've said, a new temple. A new temple which had enormous dimensions and was not on the Mount of Zion like the old temple was. So we have this radical shift away from the very specific instructions that God gave to King Solomon about building a temple on this particular location and to this particular design, and I will dwell only there, to now Ezekiel being shown a temple which not only seems to be in a different location, but may not even be of earth, because the dimensions of that temple are so grand that it seems to be that the temple is a kind of spiritual temple rather than a physical temple, a temple that can only exist in heaven rather than on the earth. And this is the new blueprint for creation and for human life, which is what the temple really represented. But the more important vision that Ezekiel has, which becomes the foundations of Kabbalah, is the vision of the Merkavah, the chariot or the throne of God. So this is a vision that Ezekiel has where he sees the throne of God and he sees the orders of angels that are surrounding the throne of God. So Ezekiel sees the Almighty seated in the center of the vision, and around that there are angels that are like living flames of fire, and around that there are angels which have 4 wings each and 4 faces each, and the wings are touching, and their 4 faces are the faces of a man, a bull, an eagle, and a lion, which coincidentally enough are the symbols of the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac in ancient times, but we won't go there today. And then outside of that, carrying the whole throne on a platform of what looks like glass, there are angels which look like a series of wheels within wheels, sort of gyroscopic entities that are covered with eyes. And this is where you get the stereotype of the biblically accurate angels from. It's from this vision. So what we see is a vision of the different layers around the throne of God, around the presence of God, and it comes in the form of successive orders or ranks within the angelic hierarchy. So closest to God we have the Seraphim of living fire, and then outside of that the Cherubim with the faces of the living creatures, and outside of that we have the Ophanim, who are the wheels of the throne. And in creating this multi-level division, Ezekiel is showing the successive degrees of separation between the presence of God and the rest of the world. And there's a reason why these degrees of separation are necessary. It's because the idea of the presence of God in Judaism is linked to the idea of holiness. And to be holy is to be uncontaminated by the stuff of the world. It's to be set apart and pure. And in the original temple, which was said to where God was said to reside in the Holy of Holies, that holiness, that purity was preserved by having an inner chamber that was separated off from the outer chamber of the temple, and the outer chamber of the temple was in turn separated off from other chambers of the temple, and that was separated off from the rest of the city. So in order to enter into the holier layers required a period of purification and rituals of purification to banish unholiness and to embody holiness. And one way of thinking about this in modern terms is if you think about any sci-fi film that's been about the spread of a global pandemic or some kind of nuclear winter or some sort of mutation or fungus or something that's spreading through the general population, then you probably see a scene of people in hazmat suits going from the outside world where the contaminant is into the safety of whatever secure facility they come from. They will enter one room and then the doors will shut behind them and they will be decontaminated, and then another door will open and they will enter a new chamber, and then the door will be sealed and they may be decontaminated again, and then the door to that chamber opens and they enter back with the rest of the secure facility. So this is very related to the idea of having to purify oneself and become holy in order to enter the presence of holiness. And there was a straightforward process for that when we're talking about a physical temple. The symbolism of that was quite straightforward. But if we're talking about a direct contact with God in the form of some spiritual place that is being contacted, then how do we then preserve that concept of the holiness and separateness of God, and that remaining untouched by that which comes from the less holy worldly realm? And that's what the vision of the Merkavah achieves. It creates that the multiple levels that the manifestation of God must pass through before it can reach humanity, and vice versa. And this vision of Ezekiel's became the basis of what was later called the Merkavah tradition, or Merkavah Mysticism, which formed a part of Hebrew religion for hundreds of years. And then the next person who becomes important in Merkavah mysticism for the purposes of explaining Kabbalah is a man called Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a very interesting person. He was involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, and he came up with a new innovation in the way to read Torah and to read scripture, where he believed that every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and not only every letter, but every curve, every line, every shape of every letter of the Hebrew alphabet had some hidden meaning. And so you could find hidden codes and deeper levels of meaning within scripture, or within any sort of word in Hebrew whatsoever, by looking at the symbolism of the letters. And this would later go on to form the foundations of Gematria, the Jewish form of numerology, where numbers are attributed to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but also other symbolism was attributed to them. And perhaps another thing worth mentioning is that many of the Merkavah mystics were active around the same time in history in Judea that Gnostics and other mystical groups such as the Essenes were active in that part of the world. So it's possible that groups like the Gnostics and the early predecessors of the Kabbalists influenced one another, or on the other hand, they may just represent different branches of the same phenomenon of schools of Hebrew or Judaic thought which have a more mystical inclination or a more esoteric inclination. But the Kabbalists would not just try and identify the broad layers of the heavens that separated the pure presence of divinity from humanity, but they would try and find the blueprint of all creation on top of that, much the same way as the temple can be regarded in a symbolic sense as a blueprint of the universe, as well as of the spiritually perfected human being and their interior life.